My name is Rabbi Sam Feinsmith. I'm one of the senior core faculty members of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality teaching team. I'm calling in right now from Evanston, Illinois, which is the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. And I just want to welcome you here in the fullness of your humanity. And in that spirit, if you'd like to include your gender pronouns in your little name within your Zoom box, that's a wonderful practice. I am also white-skinned with long hair and wearing glasses and a blue polo. And it's, again, wonderful to be here today to study and practice together. So we're going to be exploring. One second here. Good. We're going to be exploring the question of how do we find a reliable, stable inner refuge in the midst of all of the change and uncertainty and instability of our lives. To do that, we'll study text, we'll explore some core ideas, but ultimately, the most important aspect of our work is going to be in our actual meditation practice itself, because all of the texts and ideas we're going to be looking at all point to our personal experience. And nothing I share here is dogma or Torah from Sinai, right? I want you to check it out for yourself in the laboratory of your own experience and trust your own experience in your own heart more than anything that I teach or offer. And we're going to be exploring a practice called self-inquiry through a Jewish spiritual lens. Some of us may be familiar with the practice by the same name that comes from the Advaita Vedanta tradition out of India. Some of us may have done this practice. The practice is essentially very similar, but the framing is going to be a little bit different. And essentially, the practice asks the fundamental question: if everything I take to be solid is actually changing, impermanent, unstable, if all of the structures that we rely upon in our lives actually tend to crumble, including our own body and mind, then who are we really? Who are we really? So this practice journey really kind of dives into the heart of the question of our identity. And who are we really, truly, deep down? What is our true and essential nature? And I'd like to really position the teachings within the trajectory in which we find ourselves right now within the Jewish calendar year as we approach Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, new month of Tammuz. And with Tammuz, we begin to come into the period, the 3-week period that begins on the 17th of Tammuz with the fast day, and then culminates with the 9th of Av, the saddest day, we might say, of the Jewish year, the day when we mark the destruction of both temples in Jerusalem, as well as countless other cataclysms that have befallen our people throughout Jewish history. And it's specifically in that kind of thematic placement within this time on the calendar in which we find ourselves that we take our inspiration for the title and the content of this practice journey. So in just a moment, we're going to turn to some text, and Mark is going to pull up the screen share. Thanks, Mark, for all of the tech support while Jet is away today, and while Kat is away today. So we'll jump in just a moment. But, the first thing I just want to say is that this practice is really near and dear to my heart. And it's been a source of tremendous freedom, insight, liberation from suffering, joy, equanimity, and well-being. And I hope it will be so for you as well. But there's no single practice that's going to work for every single person. And of course, I ask you to approach the teachings and the practices with an open mind and with a stance of engaged curiosity. And I pray that you'll be able to take something of value. But if not, leave what's not helpful by the wayside, and use only what's helpful for you. So Mark, if you could pull up that screen share, that would be really helpful for us. I want to begin with a short passage from Rabbi Alan Liu's book, This Is Real and You Were Completely Unprepared. Such a great title. And, this book is really about how to approach the high holiday period through the culmination of that period during Sukkot, Festival of Booths, with a kind of mindfulness orientation. And he actually argues here that the 9th of Av, the fast of the 9th of Av, is actually the very beginning of the high holiday period. We usually think of the month of Elul, which is the month following Av, as the period when we begin preparing for the high holidays. And Rabbi Liu of blessed memory actually says we need to think of Tishah B'Av as the focal point that brings us smack into the themes of the high holidays and begins to prepare us spiritually for the intense work of the high holidays. And he offers a beautiful anecdote here about someone he met in Northern California. And he says, I knew a man named Moshe. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't stand the guy. He was an early follower of Shlomo Carlebach, the spiritual leader and musician, was always barefoot, always stoned, always breaking out into spontaneous dancing, and always positively oozing a very unconvincing brand of joy. So some of us may know people like this. You've encountered these kinds of people. I thought he was a phony. And the phoniest thing about him was the dancing and the ersatz bliss. But one summer I went to Jerusalem and I was on the Temple Mount for the observance of Tishah B'Av. And I ran into this Moshe there. Now, since it was Tishah B'Av, and since he was a devoted neo-chassid who felt compelled to enter fully into the emotional imperatives of every holiday, he was not exuding joy. Rather, he was allowing himself to feel the sadness of Tishah B'Av as fully as he could. And suddenly I loved the guy. Suddenly he seemed utterly sincere. I think this Moshe was a genuinely depressed individual. All that dancing and joy had been an exhausting overlay on his natural personality. But now, because of Tishah B'Av, he was allowing himself to feel depressed, and he seemed completely authentic. When the walls crumbled, when the facade of fake joy fell away, he was real. He was authentically who he was, and that's why I liked him so much. Suddenly, I saw him as a man at a turning point, someone who had let the siege end, who had let the walls come all the way down, who had let the city fall, someone willing to ask, who am I really? What will be left when the walls of constructed identity come down? Mark, if you wouldn't mind scrolling to the next paragraph, that would be helpful. So what is required of us at Tishah B'Av, right? He asks, and the answer he gives is a simple turn of mind, a turn toward consciousness, a turn away from denial, from inertia, from the passive momentum of our lives, a turn away from those things that continue to happen unconsciously, and a conscious decision to change, a letting go, letting the walls of identity crumble and turning toward that which remains. Mark, you can pull the screen share away for a moment. And by the way, the bold phrases there are of my own emphasis, not Rabbi Liu's, because they really capture the essence here, which is to say that, all year round, we can construct these kinds of personas, and masks that, in some ways are adaptive because they help to protect us from the inherent truth that everything we rely upon in this life, everything will crumble because everything is essentially impermanent. This is one of the essential insights of our practice. There is nothing stable, nothing solid. Not our body, not our mind, not our world, not our political systems, not our relationships, nothing. And that's quite a difficult truth to swallow. So we create all kinds of, personas and masks to shield us from that reality, from that truth. And we put on airs, everything is okay. Everything is okay. And that we can somehow handle and manage the groundlessness of life. That's certainly my experience, And we also have all kinds of wonderful strategies and tactics, right, for trying to avoid that truth, whether it's making ourselves, the busy, important person, or whether it's, through distracting ourselves, in food and drink, or in, kind of meaningless social interactions or meaningless speech, you know, or spending all of our time on social media, becoming kind of enamored with and absorbed into other people's lives, or all kinds of political, ideological debates or what have you, or really digging our heels in, to stake a claim, with our social group to the exclusion of other social groups, But you know what? Ultimately, we know it doesn't really work. And when the walls crumble and everything falls apart, which is going to happen inevitably for every one of us, and probably has happened for each one of you many times in the course of your life, but, we have the opportunity to lay bare the truth that our strategies don't work and our personas and our masks aren't actually doing the trick. I'll just say personally, since November, my wife and I had COVID. My wife ended up with long COVID. We got a diagnosis of, in addition to sensory integration disorder, for our 7-year-old daughter, we got a diagnosis of attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, of autism, of generalized anxiety disorder, and a couple of other things on top of that soup, right? I got a freak finger infection and landed up in the hospital having, emergency surgery a couple of weeks ago, and this is just how it is, things are groundless. And as the Buddha teaches, the reality of sickness, old age, death, right? These are inevitable. They're inevitable. There's a 100% chance that every single one of us on this call either has or will experience the groundlessness of our life. So what do we do in the face of that reality? And this is where I want to turn now a little bit forward in the calendar to what's being anticipated on Tishah B'Av as we turn toward the high holidays with the Unatan Tokef prayer. So, Mark, if I can ask you to pull up the screen share again, we can take a look at the Unatan Tokef prayer. I think we tend to focus more on this first paragraph and less on the second, and the second is equally important. So, we state in the Unatan Tokef prayer, really in some ways the pinnacle of the high holiday service, that our origin is from dust and our destiny is back to dust. We are likened to a broken shard, withering grass, a fading flower, a passing shadow, a dissipating cloud, a blowing wind, floating dust, and fleeting dream. Here, right here in black and white, we have the truth of impermanence, stated in stark, right, unequivocal terms. This is what it's really like. This is what it's really like. And if that were the whole story, man, we would be in trouble. Wouldn't we? But the next paragraph goes on to say, right, but you, O divine one, right? You, God, our King, Melech, living and enduring spirit, El Chai V'Kayam. And there is no set span to your years. You are timeless. You could say beyond time. There is no end to the length of your days, right? Beginningless and endless. It is impossible to estimate the chariots carrying your glorious presence, which is to say, we cannot possibly fathom how many vehicles there are for expressing divinity in the world, right? For conveying the divine presence. And there's really no possibility to elucidate your name's inscrutability, which is to say that the divine name is a name beyond names. There's a way in which we might imagine that we're talking about some God out there, beyond the world, right? Inaccessible, transcendent. But one of the chidushim, or the novel insights of the Hasidic tradition, and the ways in which we're channeling that tradition in the neo-Hasidic framework at IJS here, is that actually, no, we can actually discover that divine reality, the supreme reality by diving into our own being, by diving deeply into our own being. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be exploring how we might discover an inner refuge, right? That doesn't depend on in any way the conditions of time and space, that isn't limited in any ways by those realities. And as such, it is indestructible, timeless, and innately stable, peaceful, content, free. And I don't want you to take my word for it. We're going to be checking it out for ourselves. And let's turn now to Dov Ber of Mezrich, the Maggid of Mezrich, who teaches here that, contrary to our conventional thinking, we imagine that the destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av was such a calamitous event. And in fact, it was, and many tens of thousands of Jews were massacred, and the city was laid waste, and it was horrible. And yet, at the same time, the Maggid of Mezrich says, actually, there was some profound silver lining. And he goes on to say, indeed, currently, during this time of our exile, and he's living during the mid to late 1700s in Ukraine, the Jews are very poor, they have very little political power. And he says, indeed, currently, during this time of our exile, it's much easier to attain the Holy Spirit than it was in temple times. Consider the parable of a queen. He says a king, but I changed it to a queen. And, the original meaning is still held in place here. You can't approach her when she's in her royal palace like you can when she's on the road, during which time all who wish may approach, even a villager who's not otherwise fit to approach the queen in her palace. When the queen is on the road, you can approach and speak with her at your own inn. So too in our time of exile, as soon as we meditate upon the Blessed One with dveikut, with wholehearted and single-pointed concentration, and a desire to really connect ourselves to that part of our being that is divine, that is transcendent, that is untouched by the changing circumstances of our lives and of our world. The presence immediately rests upon us and takes up residence within us. And Pema Chodron puts this teaching in contemporary terms by saying, the very first noble truth of the Buddha points out that suffering is inevitable for human beings as long as we believe that things last, that they don't disintegrate, that they can be counted on to satisfy our hunger for security. From this point of view, the only time we ever know what's really going on is when the rug's been pulled out and we can't find anywhere to land. We use these situations either to wake ourselves up or to put ourselves to sleep. Right now, in the very instant of groundlessness, is the seed of taking care of those who need our care and of discovering our true nature. Thanks for the screen share, Mark. We're all done with it. So I want to put before you the invitation to explore whether when things fall apart in our lives, right, we might, rather than going back to sleep and pretending that that's not true and distracting ourselves and using all kinds of ego-driven strategies to avoid that reality, to avoid that truth, and to try to put solid ground underfoot, when in fact there is no solid ground underfoot. To instead turn inward and see if, as the Maggid of Mezrich instructs us, we might be able to discover the divine right here inside of ourselves. In a manner that doesn't require us to go to a special place like a temple, right, or a shrine, but that can actually be accessed anywhere we are, here and now, and carried with us wherever we go, in the midst of life's joys and in the midst of life's difficulties. So let's go inside. And the invitation is to adopt a posture that is both relaxed and grounded and at the same time alert and dignified. The eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more regulating, safer, and supportive for you. And let's begin just by taking a couple of deep cleansing and relaxing breaths. settling the body, gathering in our attention from its dispersion. With our mindfulness, creating, as it were, a kind of inner sanctuary or temple. That isn't dependent on a physical structure. And the invitation is now to gather your attention into an anchor in the body in the present moment. And that could be the rising and falling of your breath, if that feels like a safe home base for you. Alternatively, it could be the sensations of contact between your hands and your lap. Or it could be the awareness of the sensations of sound as they arise and change and pass away. One of the first insights on this path of self-inquiry as we examine who are we really and point ourselves in the direction of our essential nature, our divine nature. Is that in reality, we are not essentially the body. We tend to operate with the belief that we are this body and that we are as such limited by its discrete edges and boundaries, by the body's inherent impermanence and fragility. But let's check out whether that's actually true. Are we actually, in reality, the body? So simply observe the phenomena of embodied sensation arising and passing away. As you hold in mind, without trying to think your way through to an answer, the question, am I the body? Is that who I really am? Of course, the mind may wander off and get lost in the future or float into the past. If that happens, you can simply note that you've become distracted. Recognize that thinking is happening, imagining is happening, fantasizing is happening, remembering is happening. And then gently come back, dropping your attention back into the body here and now. And again, lightly holding this question, am I the body? Is this who I really am? Continue to fill the body with consciousness, with awareness. Noticing the current, the ever-changing fluid current of sensation. As you do consider is the belief that I am the body, is that true, or is it just a conditioned habit of perception? A habit born of inattention, out of assumption. See if you can trust what's true in your moment-to-moment experience more than any preconception or habitual belief that you've been carrying. as you observe the body this way, moment by moment, as it changes. Is it more accurate to say that you are the body, or that the current, the river, the stream of the body is moving through you? Turn it over to Mark now to lead us in Warner's Kaddish. And
Thank
if
you.
you like, you can share insights or observations in the chat.
So friends, thank you so much, Sam. We seal the practice as we do each day, offering you an opportunity to recite the Morning Kaddish if you're in mourning or observing a yard site, or if it's your custom to do so. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, we encourage you to stay present. For those who are, create a minyan of support and comfort. I'll share the words of the Kaddish on the screen. And if you are joining me, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitkadal,
Yitkadash,
Shemei Rabbah,
Shemei Rabba,
Amen.
B'Yalma, Divrach, Yirutei, V'Yavlich Malchutei, B'Chayechon, Uv'Yomecho, Uv'Chayedecho, Be'Yisrael, Ba'agala, Uv'Yizman Kariv, Yimru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba, B'Orach, B'Olam Maya, Yitbarach, Yishtabach, B'Tar, V'Ramam, V'Aseh, V'Tadar, V'Yitalam, V'Yalam, Shemei Kudashav, La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Ishbechata v'nechemata, Da'amiran B'Yalma V'Yimru Amen. Yehi Shlam Rabba min Shemaya, V'Chaim Aleinu V'Yal Kol Yisrael V'Yimru Amen. Oseh Shalom V'Ramam, Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yal Kol Yisrael, V'Yal Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'Yimru. Amen.
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 Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, we're looking forward to the remaining sessions in this beautiful series that Sam is leading us in through Thursday. So Sam will be leading us for the rest of the week, except for Friday, when Rebecca Schisler of our faculty will be here to lead us to sit into Shabbat together. I want to thank Eileen Monahan Chopnik for sponsoring today's sit in memory of her mom, Eleanor Monahan. Thank you so much for supporting our practice, Eileen, and for honoring the beautiful soul of your mom in this way. And as always, friends, you're invited to stay on for a little bit of conversation or questions for our teacher for today, Rabbi Sam Feinsmith, who I'll bring in here, or just to share, as Sam invited, any reflections on the practice in the chat box. Usually we will go to 1:30 with our Q&A. Today we have to end a little bit earlier since this Zoom room is needed for the next IJS session in another program. So we'll go to about maybe the next 9 minutes or so. So if you do have a question for Sam, please put it in the chat. I'm going to put in the chat as well the link to the link to today's source sheet that Sam shared. If I can get it. Managing this tech stuff. Not so easy, friends. Not so easy. Big kudos to Jet and Kat for doing this every day for us. So there's the link to the source sheet if you didn't get it earlier. Sam, thank you. As always, so powerful, so beautiful. Here's a question I have for you, and I'm going to keep an eye out. We can both keep an eye out for question. Which was that for me, I was thinking that when things, this metaphor of things falling apart, or of the elements of the self kind of falling away, I feel like it's easier for me to access this practice when that's about me. That is when, I've got whatever troubles I've got in my life, it helps for me to go to this practice. But, you shared honestly and vulnerably, about your daughter and about your wife, and right, about when others are going through Cirrus, right? Can you maybe say a little bit about how this practice works for you in that situation when, when others are struggling?
Sure. Well, first of all, I find that during the times when I am able to stabilize my capacity to rest in my true nature. And by the way, we've just begun to explore who we are not today. We haven't yet explored the question of who we are, right? We're going to begin to move in that direction as the week unfolds. But first, we need to see who we are not.
Sam, I got to ask you to unmute yourself. Sorry, I had to.
Yeah. So over the week, we'll begin to move toward the question of who we are, right? But part of the practice is really letting go of false identities and mistaken identifications. So when I'm able to abide in my true nature, I can be with the suffering of others while maintaining a very wonderful, rich, stable kind of quality of equanimity and well-being and expansiveness, and compassion naturally flows from that place, right? So the one thing I'll say is, it helps me to be more present for people who are suffering, and to not get kind of collapsed into their suffering, or to kind of stumble over my own discomfort at witnessing their suffering. So I can be a better support and be of better service to those people as a result. When I'm not operating from the egoic identification with the discrete and finite body and mind, and instead inhabiting my true nature. The second piece, though, is that I really try to make an effort to relate to people not as discrete body, mind, egos, right? But to see their true nature shining forth through them, which is to say that even when we're suffering and even when everything is crumbled, whether it's our health or our marriage or the well-being of the people in our lives or our job or anything else, right? Or there's a pandemic in the world, or war in the world, whatever it is. Try to really train in remembering and actually, in a very felt sense, right, seeing people, through seeing through the lattice work of the body mind to their true nature, which is inherently whole and untouched and untarnished by all of the exigencies and changes and difficulty of our lives. And in that way, my sense is that deep calls to deep in some way, which is to say that when you're abiding in your true nature and you can see someone kind of radiating their true nature out in the world, even if they don't recognize their true nature, right? There's some sort of a deeper quality of communion that can happen, where, as it were, soul meets soul, right? As opposed to ego meeting ego. And that process in and of itself can be profoundly healing and restorative for people who are suffering.
Yeah.
I would say that that's an important practice. That's part and parcel of the self-inquiry practice, not only to recognize our own nature, but to recognize that our own nature not being personal and being universal, right, is the same for every single person on this call, every single person in the world, even though we may not recognize that to be the case, recognize it to be so.
There's a question, there are a lot of great questions here, which we will not have time to get to, but hopefully we have a little bit more time the next few days. But Lori's asking a question that I think probably you would want to address, which is that there's a challenge believing sensations of the body when one has experienced trauma that's led to dissociation, including from one's own pain. How to return to hearing and trusting the body as the river runs through us. So
Yeah,
what's your suggestion for how to adapt that?
It's a really important question, because the body holds all of the memory of the trauma. The trauma is held in our nervous system, the issues are in our tissues. And the body, for trauma survivors, right, really may not feel like a safe place, right, to inhabit, to abide in. Of course, you can't engage in inquiry around the body if you can't attend to the body and kind of abide with the body. So, lest such a practice become inaccessible to folks who may be trauma survivors, I think a word or two is important here. What I'll say in my own experience, because I'm a survivor of intergenerational trauma, developmental trauma, and acute trauma, and coming home to my body has been absolutely essentially to my journey, not only of healing my trauma, but also being able to recognize my essential nature. We don't recognize our essential nature in spite of the body, but actually through the body. By filling the body with consciousness and awareness and presence, ultimately, the body can guide us toward our true nature. And what I would say is that there's a whole field that's emerged over the last decade or so of trauma-sensitive mindfulness, and that there's ways to direct attention into the body that won't re-trigger traumatic memories, sensations, and feelings. So we need to know a little bit about that, but I'll say just very briefly that one of the important principles to keep in mind is that we need to stay within choice and redirect our attention away from our core, which is often where traumatic sensations are held in the body. So for example, if the instructions are to pay attention to the breath, that may not be a great idea for a trauma survivor, because that brings our attention squarely into, right, the chest, abdomen, lower abdomen area, where traumatic sensations may actually be stored and held. So actually directing our attention toward our extremities, like, the feeling of sensation between our feet and the floor, or our fingertips, or even places of contact between the body and itself, like the hands against the hands, or the top of the head can be a way to still cultivate body awareness in the present moment and continue the inquiry into the nature of the body as an impermanent energy field rather than a solid entity, right? Through these kinds of modifications. It can also be really helpful to focus on neutral to pleasant sensations in the body. So for example, the elbow tends to not have a whole lot of sensation. It's unlikely that we'll re-trigger traumatic sensations and memories in the elbow, right? Or that we'll feel those in the elbow when we're paying attention to the elbow. The same is true for the back of the knee.
Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm really sorry to interrupt you, and this is very important stuff. But maybe we can pick it up tomorrow, because I'm getting the signal that we have to
We need to make way for
turn over our Zoom room. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the general principle, stay in choice and redirect your attention elsewhere. If directing your attention into the core, feels triggering. Great.
Sam, beautiful start to this week of practice. And we look forward to tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday. And just a reminder, of course, if you can't join us any of the days, all the sessions are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. If you want to revisit this one as well, you can make use of the recording. So thanks, everyone, as always, for being here. Many blessings for a beautiful rest of your day. We hope to see you tomorrow. Much gratitude to you, Sam, and to each of you for being here and for your incredible devotion to this community of practice. Many blessings, everyone.